I'm Beverly Siegel, your host today on The Better Part. We're here in Portola Valley at a place that most Bay Area residents have heard much about, but few have actually seen close up: the San Andreas Fault. California is earthquake country. Stay tuned as two geologists take us on a tour of that part of the fault which runs through our area and answer some of our questions about it.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Meet Chet Ruckey and his son Bob, two geologists with years of experience studying the San Andreas Fault. A longtime resident of Portola Valley, Chet worked with the U.S. Geological Survey, and Bob is an amateur geologist following in his dad's footsteps. The San Francisco earthquake, however, was but one of many that have resulted from episodic displacement along this fault throughout its life of about 15 to 20 million years. These two geologists are also detectives of a sort. They are going to show you how they discovered that a part of this famous fault is not exactly where it was long thought to be, and how this has changed the maps of the fault line. Why is this important to the community and to property owners? Let's listen to their story and see. Okay, Chet, we're here in Portola Valley to learn about the San Andreas Fault. So tell us, what is the San Andreas Fault?
The San Andreas Fault is one of the major faults of the world. And it extends on land from near Cape Mendocino on the north down the western side of the state to the Gulf of California. It's important to realize that rocks on the west side of the fault moved northward relative to those on the east side of the fault. And the movement was like this. In the actual break in 1906 was from near Cape Mendocino south to the vicinity of Mission San Juan Bautista, just a few miles south of Gilroy. The ground broke as much as 20 feet, some places more than that, north of San Francisco, but much less than that south of San Francisco.
So what happened in Portola Valley in the 1906 earthquake?
Well, the fault ruptured across the entire length of Portola Valley. It broke fences, it buckled water pipes and broke water pipes. Overall damage probably was relatively light because the town was sparsely populated at that time.
Okay, Bob, why is it so important to know the location of an earthquake fault?
Knowing the location of a fault is important because you don't want to build a building right on top of the fault. You need to know where the fault is located. Preferably, a building is built away from the fault. In the town of Portola Valley, there are restrictions as to how close a house can be built to a fault. And the town was one of the first, if not the first, towns in the whole state to have regulations on where you could build next to a fault. And to help support those regulations, the town had a geologic map made so that people could know where they could or could not build a fault next to the fault.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So Chet, what exactly is known about the San Andreas Fault in Portola Valley?
Well, in Portola Valley, two main traces of the fault have developed over the years: a western trace and an eastern trace. A trace is the path of a fault along the Earth's surface. In the extreme southern part of the town, these two faults are well known, as well as in the northern part of the town. But in the vicinity of Portola Valley here, the location is not well known, and that's why we are here. And one reason the fault is not well known in this part of the town is that much of the ground is covered with thick vegetation, including poison oak. Now, geologists will usually go to any length to get a specimen or to make an observation, but the combination of the thick vegetation and especially the poison oak is enough even to deter a geologist. Well,
it would certainly deter me. Which trace of the fault actually moved in 1906?
Well, in most of Portola Valley, the western trace moved. However, for years it has been believed that some movement took place on the eastern trace, which is where we are right now.
Why was it believed that this is where the fault moved in 1906?
This belief is based largely on one photograph that was included in an important and very influential report written in 1968. That photograph shows a man on the side of the road, actually on the left side of the road. Most prints of that photograph, however, that people have seen, show the man on the right side of the road. It was found that in this version with the man standing on the left, that the photograph is a good match for the turns on this road at this locality, looking down in this particular direction. The resemblance between the shape of the road at this locality and the actual shape of the road is striking.
Bob, is it correct to show the man on the left side of the road?
That's a good question, because if it is correct that the man should be on the left side of the road, then this is where the fault crossed the road in 1906. However, if the man should be on the right side of the road, then this is not the correct location. Now, it turns out that there were several other photographs of this same location where the fault crossed the road. And when we examined some of those photographs, we looked for clues to see which side of the road should that man be on. And in one set of photographs, we found an important clue, and that clue was in the buttons of the people that were in the photograph. You see, clothing for men, the buttons are on the right side, and for women, the buttons are on the left. And by knowing that and looking at these people, we can figure out which way the prints should be made. Now, it turns out that in one photograph, it is very easy to see the buttons in a man's jacket. With that photograph, we can learn that, in fact, the man in the previous photograph should not be on the left side of the road. He should be on the right side of the road. And that means that this is not the place where the fault crossed Alpine Road in 1906.
It's a good thing we're talking about 1906, because these days women do wear men's jackets.
Here's the photograph of this scene with the buttons in a man's jacket clearly visible. In this photograph, it was correctly printed because the buttons are on the man's right side. Now when you compare this photograph with the photograph of the man on the side of the road, we see that the only way that these photographs work is for the man on the side of the road to be on the right side of the road. And that means that this was not the location where the fault crossed Alpine Road in 1906.
If the eastern trace did not move in 1906, where did the fault move in Portola Valley?
We think we're standing at the place where the fault moved in Portola in 1906.
Oh, wow.
We were about 450 feet west of the previous location, the location of the eastern trace of the fault, whereas here we are at the western trace of the fault.
How do you know that this is the place where the San Andreas Fault moved?
Well, important clues were written in a report published by the state of California 2 years after the fault. Those clues include the following. One is that the road turns a bit right here, as you can see. Secondly, the rupture went along the south side of the road, the side on the right in our field of view. And there's a photograph showing a man and a boy across each side of the fault. And the third clue is that after crossing the road, the fault went into a field on the left. And you can see that there is lower ground on the left and mountains on the right. So this is where the fault crossed and went to the lower ground. Several years ago, a geophysicist in Portola Valley named Sheldon Briner studied the photograph with the man on the right and determined that this is the fault location. He did a good job. We found a notebook in the archives at Stanford University, a notebook written by F.W. Turner, a student in 1906 who made observations on the San Andreas Fault at various localities. Fortunately, that notebook includes a map that shows exactly where the fault crossed this road. This road shows on old maps, so this is one of the best clues we have as to just where the western trace of the fault is here in Portola Valley.
In the photograph with a man on the side of the road, does the large fracture indicate where exactly the fault moved?
This crack dominates the field of view and might seem to show the direction of the fault. However, after studying this location, we have learned that the crack does not show the direction the fault moved. In the background, you can see the cracks along the side of the road. We realize that this angled crack resulted not from a change in the direction of the fault, but from the way the fault broke the ground. Instead of continuing towards us to the lower left side of the picture, the fault becomes a series of breaks, each at a sharp angle to the fault. And this can be demonstrated this way. If we are looking at the fault and moving the fault, the crack is going down in this direction. What happened as shown in the photograph is that the fault began to break not in a straight line, but as a series of breaks at an angle to the direction of the fault, but staggered in the actual direction of the fault. These breaks are en echelon fractures, and they are typical of the fault at various places in the town of Portola Valley. Knowing this is the place where the fault crossed the road tells us a very important fact, that the fault movement in 1906 was along the western trace of the fault, not the eastern trace of the fault at the previous locality. To understand, one reason this trace has been a mystery has already been mentioned, and it's because of the vegetation on the side of the road. It's much too thick. It has considerable amounts of poison oak in it. To understand the western trace and solving the problem of seeing through the vegetation, we needed to use a relatively new technology called LIDAR.
Bob, what is LIDAR?
LIDAR stands for Light Detection and Ranging. It uses laser beams. With LIDAR, it's possible to produce three-dimensional images of the terrain without the vegetation. It's a tremendous tool. And with LIDAR, it's possible to see features in the ground, geology, that otherwise would be impossible to see.
How does it work to actually remove the vegetation?
Well, LIDAR works by using an airplane equipped with LIDAR equipment that flies over the ground, and it scans the ground with a laser. The laser is fired in pulses, and a sensor in the airplane looks down on the ground and detects the place where each pulse is reflected off of the ground, and it measures information about that pulse spot, the location, and even the distance from the airplane to the ground. And it collects information about each pulse. All of this happens tens of thousands of times a second. LIDAR is amazing. It can produce images that are accurate to within just a few inches.
Okay, Bob, tell us how LIDAR actually removes the vegetation.
Well, this is done by using only the laser beam pulses that make it all the way to the ground. And to explain how this is actually accomplished, I'll give an example. When a plane flies over a tree, like one of these, some of the laser beam pulses are going to hit the top branches and leaves of the tree, but a few are going to make it all the way to the ground. And by using only the pulses that are furthest from the airplane, it's possible to virtually just remove the trees, the data about the trees from the image, and then you're left with information about the actual terrain, the actual ground itself.
I see. That's great. A great tool.
Here is a 3D LiDAR image of this area. It is an angled view, as though the camera were up in a helicopter looking at the ground at about a 45-degree angle. The image includes the place where the fault crosses Alpine Road, and it includes Coal Mine Ridge, the ridge just west of us, and a view of the ridge south of here. In this image, it is possible to see a lineament on the ground on Coal Mine Ridge. This is the San Andreas Fault. The pencil is following the trace of the fault. Here the trace crosses numerous landslides, proving that the trace must be younger than the landslide. The trace is visible all the way to the base of the ridge.
Bob, is there a place where we can see the 1906 trace of the fault?
Yes, there's a place that's not far from here where it shows up in LiDAR, and you can also see it on the ground. It's where where the fault crossed Corte Madera Creek. Let's go there now. We've now come a few hundred yards from the place where we were before. We're a little further along Alpine Road, and we've entered the Windy Hill Open Space Preserve, and the entrance is just behind me. And just behind me over on this side is the actual place where we're going to see the feature of the fault. But before we see that spot, I would like to explain what to actually look for so that when you see it, you can recognize what the fault really is. Here is an illustration of a fault that was offset by the creek. After an earthquake, the creek is offset by movement of the fault. And after a series of earthquakes, the offset becomes larger. Here's, to understand this better for how that concept applies to this location, here is a map of the area where we are. This map was made from LiDAR. It shows the entrance to the Windy Hill Open Space Preserve, which was just over there, and where it shows Alpine Road and Willowbrook Road. And here's where the creek flows under the bridge. It's flowing roughly to the northeast, and then downstream from the bridge, it makes a distinct right-angle bend. And this is the beginning of the offset. The creek then flows southeast along the offset, and then the creek turns again to the northeast. And I'll show you that spot so you can. The size of the offset is about 90 feet, and that tells us that it's taken a couple of thousands of years to create this feature. This place where the creek is offset by the San Andreas Fault is a location that my father and I discovered. It does not show up on any maps, partly because it's covered in trees and it's very, very dark. The maps only show a general representation of where the creek is actually located. The offset doesn't appear. So this place was really not known to geologists before when the reports like the one in 1968 were produced. And consequently, the Western Trace has never really been, the location of the Western Trace has never really been understood until now. In previous maps, the trace has been placed up in Coal Mine Ridge, and it was represented on a map as a dotted line, saying that this is probably where the Western Trace is, but nobody could really know with certainty. But now, knowing that there is this place, this offset on the creek, and also knowing where the fault crosses Alpine Road, and also knowing where, through LiDAR, where the lineaments of the fault can be seen further to the south, we believe we know where the western trace is, and this is the section of the fault that moved in 1906.
We want to thank the two geologists for showing us the famous fault and taking us on this little tour and giving us their time.
And we'd like to thank you for helping us present this information. It has been fun.
Thank you very much. It's our pleasure.
Now that we have discovered where the San Andreas Fault is located in Portola Valley, let's take a look at what quake damage it has done to the city of San Francisco, both in 1906 and 1989. The 1906 quake occurred on the morning of April 18th, around 12 minutes past 5 o'clock. It was a devastating magnitude 8.3 on the Richter scale, and both the tremor and fire killed more than 3,000 people. Most of the people of San Francisco were asleep that Wednesday morning. The sky had a light blue luminescence of clear spring dawn. The air was clear and fresh, and for those people up and around, it seemed a promising beginning to a nice new day. On famous downtown Market Street, which ends at the ferry building near the bay, people were heading to or coming from the ferry building direction in streetcars, horse-drawn carriages, or wagons, a common scene until filled with a deafening roar. The ground began to vibrate, to shift and twist. Buildings toppled. The earth shook with the sound of thunder. Fires broke out everywhere, giving survivors the feeling that their world was coming to an end. Between 227,000 and 300,000 people were left homeless out of a population of about 410,000. People fled to Oakland or Berkeley, and refugee camps were set up at Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, the Panhandle, and along the beaches. During the cleanup, it was estimated that over 6.5 billion bricks were cleaned and reused during rebuilding. The Army was called in to restore order and protect both city and personal properties. Reconstruction was fast and mostly completed by 1915 in time for the Panama Pacific Exposition, which celebrated the reconstruction of San Francisco and its rise from the ashes. The 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, the second largest in California during the 20th century, occurred on Tuesday, October 17th, around 5:04 p.m. local time. It was a major earthquake, magnitude 7.1, that struck the San Francisco Bay Area. It was caused by a slip along the San Andreas Fault lasting 10 to 15 seconds. The quake killed 63 people, injured 3,757, and left some 3,000 to 12,000 people homeless. The earthquake occurred during the warm-up practice for the third game of the 1989 World Series, featuring the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants. The game was being played at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. The game was immediately canceled. The San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge suffered relatively minor damage as a 76 by 50-foot section of the upper deck on the eastern cantilever side crashed onto the deck below. The worst disaster of this quake was the collapse of the two-level Cypress Street Viaduct of Interstate 880 in West Oakland. The failure of a 1.25-mile section of the viaduct, also known as the Cypress Freeway, killed 42 and injured many more. The viaduct was built on filled marshland, and half was on somewhat more stable ground. The Marina District was built on filled land made of a mixture of sand, dirt, rubble, waste, and other materials containing a high percentage of groundwater. 4 buildings were destroyed by fire, and 7 buildings collapsed. Another 63 damaged structures were judged too dangerous to live in. Much has been learned about construction in earthquake-prone areas as a result of these past experiences. Building codes have been improved and older buildings strengthened, but there are many faults in the Bay Area certain to produce large earthquakes in the future. All Bay Area communities are at risk from the damaging effects of quakes, strong shaking, landsliding, and liquefaction. Scientists estimate that there is more than a 60% chance of a damaging earthquake striking the region in the next 30 years. If you live or work in the region, you need to know what you can expect during and after a quake, and what you need to do beforehand to be safe and reduce damage. Create a disaster preparedness plan and start preparing now.
Thank you for joining us. We hope that you have found today's program both informative and interesting. If you would like to suggest a topic or a guest for The Better Part, you can always reach us at the Cupertino Senior Center. The number there is 408-777-3150. You can learn more about us and order a copy of this program or one of the many programs that we've done by visiting our website. The website address is www.thebetterpart.com. The Better Part has many of its programs available through the Santa Clara County Library System. And The Better Part has selected programs also on YouTube. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.